Welcome to the INFOWARS Nightly News. It's July 4th, 2016. I'm David Knight. Here are our top stories.
We celebrate the 4th of July as a reminder of earning our independence from a tyrannical and oppressive government. Just a reminder to the Obama administration, there's plenty of room on the calendar for another holiday.
It seems all too often I have to begin this broadcast talking about the most recent terror attack, and today is no exception, this time at a restaurant in Bangladesh. It says up to 9 gunmen entered, opened fire, and hurled makeshift bombs. Gunmen armed with pistols, swords, and bombs, according to a witness. A worker who escaped reported gunmen shouted Allahu Akbar as they opened fire. Now, I'm not one of those hate all Muslims, kill all Muslims, blame all Muslims people, but I do recognize the fact that this attack and the attack before that 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 all have the common theme of people said that they were doing it as the religion of peace. Once again, many nice Muslim people out there. But if I saw a crime wave or a series of crimes all perpetrated by Hindus or Christians for that matter, I would recognize the fact that they were doing that, and I wouldn't redact it from the official FBI transcripts of what actually happened. So I think it is relevant. Now, is it to say all of them are doing it? Absolutely not. But it is relevant, as this is a motivating factor, and it's something that definitely needs to be looked at. And it says 9 gunmen so far. By the time you read this, it very well could have changed. More information may come available. They may have a more accurate body count, things of that nature. But that's what it is for the time being. Now let's talk about some other news, bring it back here to the United States of America. And what difference does it make? Well, it makes a lot of difference for the fact that the Attorney General of the United States was meeting with Bill Clinton. And under normal circumstances, maybe this wouldn't be that big of a deal, but it just happens that Bill's wife is under investigation by the feds, and nobody on the left really seems to think that this is a pertinent amount of information. And we have the report right here. The FBI ordered a press blackout. The former president steps into her plane, and then they speak for 30 minutes privately, an ABC 15 reporter said about the Phoenix meeting. The FBI, there on the tarmac, instructing everybody around, no photos, no pictures, no cell phones. The FBI may have even violated 18 U.S. Code 242, which deprives rights under color of law, and it points to a conspiracy to subvert investigations targeting the Clintons, because it's not the FBI's job to block journalists or even private citizens from filming public officials who are meeting in an official capacity. Now, according to Mrs. Lynch, they weren't talking about anything official. Matter of fact, let's just go ahead and listen to what she said the meeting was actually about.
Was it appropriate for you to meet with former President Clinton while your agency is in the middle of an investigation of his wife's email servers?
Well, I did see the president at the Phoenix airport the other night. As I was landing, he was headed out. He did come over and say hello and speak to my husband and myself and talk about his grandchildren and his travels and things like that. So that was the extent of that. And no discussions were held on any cases or anything of that. And he didn't raise anything about that either.
So according to Mrs. Lynch, they were just talking about golf and grandkids and puppy dogs and hot air balloons and all that. But now we see Judicial Watch is demanding that the Inspector General probe into the scandalous Lynch-Clinton meeting. And even Barack Obama's former advisor, David Axelrod, admitted that the meeting created bad optics. And of course, Trump jumped on this and he said, it was really a sneak. It was something that they didn't want publicized, as I understand it. I think it's so terrible. I think it's so horrible. I think it's one of the big stories of the week, of this month, of this year. And when you consider how Mrs. Clinton is definitely under investigation, I think that is a pretty big deal for Mrs. Lynch to be meeting with Bill. If nothing else, I think it's a conflict of interest. Is it criminal? I guess time will tell. But for right now, I think it is definitely a conflict of interest. And she has come out on record, Mrs. Lynch, saying that she would not do this again. And I was like, if you're going to do it the first time, you might as well just let the reporters in so they can see that you talk about golf and grandkids and all that kind of stuff. But this wouldn't be the first time the Clintons were up to something that, in my opinion, just wasn't no good. If you guys recall, it was earlier this year, and I guess going into last year as well, where Bill was out there campaigning at polling places. Now, for people who don't know this, like if you think about if you go to a grocery store or something where the polls are open, you notice the guys in the back of the parking lot with their signs for their candidates or their flags or whatever saying, hey, vote for, candidate X. And the reason they're in the back of the parking lot because they know you can't be in 150 feet of the polling place influencing public opinion. Not only was Bill Clinton within 150 feet, he was actually in the freaking polling place, but nobody wants to take that too serious. And it says, former President Clinton, he appeared at the rallies for support of his wife. And the Secretary of State, William F. Galvin, told the New York Times that he had to remind the election workers that even a president can't go inside and work a polling place. That is correct, Mr. Bill Clinton. You cannot be in there influencing the crowd, swaying it one way for your wife, taking pictures, as some of the reports say that he was doing. He's like, I'm out here talking. I can't do the Bill Clinton voice, but you know how he sounds like. He's out there influencing public opinion for his wife. Can't do that. If you want to do that, you have to go stand in the back of the parking lot with everybody else. And once again, as we talk about the Clintons and the Clinton machine and all the things that they have going on, you guys know so much about Benghazi. We talked about it here extensively, but I want to talk about the Benghazi victims, the wives, the children, the people who have to suffer the fact that their husbands, their fathers, their brothers are not coming home. And we've seen multiple reports of people being assured by Mrs. Clinton, by their telling of the story, that, she'd work the thing out, she'd get to the bottom of it. And later she came out and just said they were liars, they're blowing things out of proportion. And we have one of these people right here, Benghazi widow. Clinton has no right to tell me to move on.
I think that nobody in government can tell me how I feel, what I should feel about it. She has no right, nor does anyone in government have the right to tell me it's time to move on. They're not in my shoes. I think that, that's the essence of what they have done, is they've been dismissive.
Now, in other news, as we were talking about earlier, then I guess the overall attitudes towards journalists, and we'll get into that a little bit more with the FBI from another angle. But right now, I want to talk about a former CIA operative, and she was giving tips to journalists on how to uncover information and also how to view information in the first place.
In Iraq or Syria, and ask anybody why America dropped bombs. You get, they were waging war on Islam. And you walk in America and you ask, why were we attacked on 9/11? And you get, they hate us because we're free. Those are stories manufactured by a really small number of people on both sides who amass a great deal of power and wealth by convincing the rest of us to keep killing each other.
It's always interesting to me, the flow of information. And I remember when I went to college, they made us watch this video or two movies, as a matter of fact. And at the time, I didn't really understand why we were watching these. I kind of felt like the instructors were wasting our time, just giving us a day we didn't have to do any work. But now I understand them so much better. They were Wag the Dog and also Network. You guys have probably seen Network. It's in our promo pieces for the Alex Jones Show. But basically, those two films, and there are many other books, propaganda, other things out there that you can read, that talk about the control of information and how you're being manipulated into something. For example, in Wag the Dog, they're trying to sell people this phony war. So they brought in this big-time Hollywood producer to pretty much manufacture a war of sorts to get people to buy into it. And that's what you see a lot on your news channels. It's not so much a war, but they want you to buy into a certain way of thinking. I love the old Saturday Night Live sketch where they do the Schoolhouse Rock, but it's basically talking about how, I believe it was NBC, it's Saturday Night Live on NBC, is funded by a bunch of defense contractors. They don't want you to know that they're funded by a bunch of defense contractors. Meanwhile, they're propping up the war. Just basic things like that. So it's a new way for you to view information. It just helps you, kind of like in the movie They Live, put on the glass and then just see the propaganda for what it is. Now, as we're talking about censorship of journalists and how the FBI reacts to that, now we see secret rules make it pretty easy for the FBI to spy on journalists. The classified rules obtained by The Intercept and dating back to 2013 govern the FBI's use of national security letters, which allow the Bureau to obtain information about journalists' calls without going to a judge or informing the news organization being targeted. They have previously been released only in heavily redacted form. Media advocates said the documents show that the FBI imposes few constraints on itself when it bypasses the requirements to go to court and obtain subpoenas or search warrants. That's exactly right. When you have a target, you're supposed to have probable cause. I'm looking at this person on this date and this activity for this reason. You can't just say, I feel like looking up Bob over here, so I'm gonna go tap his phones or whatever it is that they do. That is illegal. And I know they have this holier than thou thing where I don't need permission of a judge to look at your documents because I'm fighting national security. Well, if you stop looking at all the journalist files and actually go look at the suspected terrorist, you may prevent some terrorist activity, but that makes too much sense. You guys are gathering all this metadata, not just FBI, but NSA, whoever else. They have all this mundane metadata on normal people who are looking up, Googling pressure cookers or buying backpacks, and they got all this stuff. Meanwhile, the terrorists are running wild out here, not just in this country, but all around the world because you guys have this congested apparatus. We can't even get to the information that you really need to keep the people safe. And this is a case in point of that. A suspected terrorist, the Istanbul terrorist mastermind, was a refugee protected by the EU. The Chechen national was on a Russian terrorism watch list since 2003, but received asylum in Austria after he claimed he was severely tortured and under persecution by Russian authorities. He was later arrested in Sweden after Kalashnikov assault rifles, explosives, ammunition were found in his car, but he only spent over a year in jail. Russia again tried to extradite him later as he was crossing the border between Turkey and Bulgaria, but human rights groups pointed to his refugee status in Austria to block Moscow from getting their man. Yeah, if you guys also remember, who else was from Chechnya? The Boston bombers, or at least the older brother, going to various terrorist training camps, and DHS calls us, or the Russian calls DHS, and they're saying, hey, you might want to watch out for this sergeant. They're like, yeah, we got it, and we all know what happened later. Regardless of what you think about that whole official narrative, the point is that Russia was warning us, and Russia, the country we don't have the best of relations with, saw somebody who was such a serious threat in their mind that they picked up the phone and called us to warn us about it, but nobody really did anything. A similar thing with this guy, because they were more concerned with being politically correct. They said this guy is a refugee. He needs to be protected from those evil Russians, even though this guy clearly was a danger even before the most recent terror attack. And this is the reason why I'm a fan of border security. I'm not going to say a wall. I think the wall will be largely ineffective, but it may have its uses in some places. But regardless, when I meet these people, they say, well, you should just have free open borders. Anybody can come in and out. I think once you're in the United States, you should be able to travel unmolested, no checkpoints, nothing like that. But to have a border at Mexico, have a border at Canada, international waters, yeah, I think those are there for a reason. And now it's getting to the point where even Uber drivers are getting suckered into this. And we see smugglers use Uber-registered drivers to move migrants to U.S. border. And this is back on June 10th. 5 vehicles carrying 34 Central American migrants were apprehended while traveling together. And to be perfectly clear, when we went out to the border earlier this week and we met the family out there, it's about 20 or so people, traveling together, mostly women and children. I have no issue with those people. My beef is not with them. They came from El Salvador. They were walking for 2 months. They've ran out of provisions, water, food, whatever. They just have the clothes on their backs when they got here. I have no issue with people coming to the country. I do believe that you should do so legally, but if they find a legal reason or legal avenue to do that, fine. Welcome to America. My issue is the guys like we just talked about right here. You have these free open systems where these guys can just walk in. The Border Patrol says they get maybe 40% of the people who come across the border. How many guys like this could there be in the United States of America right now? That's why you have a border system. That's why you have customs. That's why you have the Border Patrol checkpoints at Mexico. Not in the country. I don't want to go to the checkpoint that's 100 miles inland where they ask me if I'm an American citizen and, looking in the back at a Don because he's a brown-skinned gentleman. That's not my bag. But, at the border, that's what I like, not the stuff that's going on here currently. And one of the things going on at the border is, of course, we're sending guns out. But now, what about guns in the country? Now we see an anti-gun senator was arrested in Ferguson for carrying a 9mm. Long story short, she was supposedly, allegedly, reportedly intoxicated. The cops wanted her to do a breathalyzer. She refused, and she was officially charged with failure to obey a lawful order of police and walking in the roadway. It's a very interesting thing because we always see these anti-gun senators, congressmen, like that guy out there in California who got arrested for running all those guns, and other guys around the country, they get arrested with guns, but they don't want you to have one because